They say the stars died screaming, that the last true breath of the galaxy was exhaled not in a blaze of glory, but in a whisper of forgotten names and lost hopes. There exists a cult, shrouded in ash veils and silence, who believe that all we see, all we are, and all we do is nothing more than the flickering afterimage of a cosmos that ended long ago. They are not prophets of apocalypse, for prophecy implies a future. They are mourners at a funeral none of us knew had happened. To them, the Emperor's burning throne is not a light in the dark, but the candle at a wake. The endless war of the 41st millennium is not a struggle for survival, but the twitching of a corpse refusing to know it is dead. They believe we are ghosts playing out the motions of lives we already lost. That every bolter fired, every shrine lit, every scream into the warp is merely the echo of something final, something irreversible. And in this vast necropolis of stars, only they remember the truth. To the cult known in scattered whispers as the echoes of final light, the Horus heresy was not merely the greatest tragedy in imperial history. It was the end. Not symbolically, not metaphorically, but in the deepest metaphysical sense. According to their beliefs, that cataclysmic civil war shattered the fundamental continuity of existence. When Horus struck the Emperor down upon the vengeful spirit, they claim reality cracked, not just in the warp, but in time, in memory, in truth itself. What remains, they say, is an echo, a residual flicker of a galaxy that once was but no longer is. They teach that the heresy was not a war to decide the fate of the Imperium, but its death throes. The throne world still burns with the psychic remnants of the Emperor's pain, not because he lives, but because the moment of his death repeats endlessly, like a scream reverberating in a ruined cathedral. The Astronomicon, in their doctrine, is not a lighthouse but a haunted beacon, the soul light of a god who died screaming, now caught in an eternal loop. Every soul that sees it, they claim, is being pulled deeper into unreality, guided by the dying neurons of a corpse god's final vision. They point to the decay of the galaxy not as the slow attrition of time, but as the inevitable entropy of a dead timeline. The growth of warp storms, the collapse of communication, the disintegration of knowledge, all are symptoms of cosmic rigor mortis. The universe, in their eyes, is no longer evolving. It is putrefying. The laws of physics hold not because they are sound, but because they have not yet finished unraveling. The fact that anything still functions, from laser guns to starships, is to them a cruel parody, a puppet show reenacting a long-finished act. This dogma of finality is reflected in their grim liturgies. Their priests, called ash keepers, do not preach salvation, for there is nothing left to be saved. Instead, they offer acknowledgement, acceptance, the sacrament of ending. They teach that awareness of the end is the first step to release. Many followers ritually blind themselves, not as a penance, but to symbolize their refusal to see the lie of a world still turning. They paint black suns and inverted aquili, not in mockery, but to proclaim that the light has died and the eagle has fallen. Their worldview is not merely one of despair, but of cold, crystalline clarity. In their minds, every action, from the wars of the Astartes to the rituals of the ecclesiarchy, is a hollow performance. There are no victories, only the illusion of struggle. They believe the Imperium's enemies, whether Xenos or Demon, are not adversaries in a living conflict, but scavengers gnawing at a corpse. Even chaos itself, they say, is not a force of endless change, but a tantrum of decay, as the Immaterium consumes the last thoughts of a thinking universe. Yet what makes their belief so chilling is not its fatalism, it is its serenity. They do not scream or wail. They do not rail against injustice or decry the cruelty of the galaxy. They walk calmly through war zones, their robes ash gray, their chants low and funereal. To them, every battlefield is a mausoleum, every scream a requiem, every death an affirmation. And when they are killed, for they are hunted without mercy by the Inquisition, They die smiling. Not because they welcome death, but because they believe they are already dead. Some among the Ordo Hereticus claim these cultists possess an aura that unnerves even hardened inquisitors, not because of overt power or demonic pacts, but because of the unnatural stillness they exude. They do not flinch. They do not beg. Their minds are filled not with resistance or madness, but with quiet. A terrifying, echoing quiet, as if speaking to them is like shouting into an empty cathedral. The warp seems less active around them, some say, as if even demons recognize them as fellow remnants, not playthings of the living. Their greatest heresy is not that they reject the Emperor. It is that they believe he is no longer here to reject. They do not curse him. They mourn him. Their prayers are elegies, not supplications. Their cathedrals, where found, are often built within craters or void ships long dead, lit by dying cogitators and candles made from recaptured promethium. Each one is a shrine not to hope, but to acknowledgement. Not to beginnings, but to acceptance. And perhaps, in some haunting way, that is what makes them so dangerous. Not the swords they carry, nor the minds they twist, but the idea that maybe, just maybe, they are right, that we have already lost, that we are only now beginning to remember it. The story of how the cult came to be is not recorded in any imperial archive. There is no sanctioned record, no precise date, no definitive founder. Only fragments remain, scattered like bone shards in the void, reports half-scorched, confessions torn from psychers mid-seizure, symbols etched into the hulls of derelict ships. The tale, as pieced together by those who have dared to look too long, begins with a nameless astropath who died screaming aboard an Arc Mechanicus over the dead world of Kalis Prime. That vessel, the Omniscient Reproach, had been scavenging the irradiated ruins of a once thriving Forge world when something anomalous was retrieved from a subterranean crypt. Descriptions of the object vary: a sphere of frozen light, a tome that could not be read except in dreams, a cogitator core whispering in languages older than Mars. Whatever it was, it did not corrupt in the manner of chaos. It did not tempt. It revealed. Within days, entire decks fell silent, not from violence but from surrender. The Void Priests stopped their prayers. The Skitari ceased their patrols. Servitors looped in stillness. Something had been understood, something undeniable. The only survivor was a tech adept who later immolated himself on the steps of an ecclesiarchy shrine on Hydrafer. Before his final act, he spoke just 7 words. The stars are memories that have forgotten. From this cryptic utterance, the Ordo Xenos began investigating rumors of an emergent creed spreading among isolated voidfarers and penal colonies. It was not organized at first, merely voices in the dark, refusals to repair engines, refusals to eat, refusals to breathe, suicide cults with no god, only silence. The first known consolidation came not in a fortress or temple, but in the atmosphere of a rogue planet known as Morvain's Drift, a derelict world with no sun, circling nothing, its orbit a defiance of logic. There, in the lightless cities of its surface, a gathering formed, not a convention, but a mourning. Thousands came, unbidden and unled, drawn by dreams, visions, or a sheer compulsion toward stillness. No leader proclaimed dominion. No voice claimed the truth. They simply began to chant in perfect unison, words none remembered learning. We are the breath the galaxy exhaled. Among them walked a woman in robes of pallid gray, her face veiled in memory cloth, her eyes scorched out not by fire, but by tears. She carried nothing but a bell with no clapper, which rang only in the minds of the dying. She became known as the first mourner. Her presence did not incite doctrine, it confirmed it. Her silence was not passive, it was absolute. Where she walked, engines died. Where she prayed, the warp recoiled. It is said she sat for 7 days upon the highest monolith of Morvain's Drift, and wept without ceasing, and each tear became a new apostle. This event, called the quieting, marks the true birth of the cult. From it emerged the liturgical phrases, the rejection of temporality, the absolute belief in the end already having come. But unlike most heresies, it spread not by force or zealotry, but by resonance. Those who encountered the cult, truly encountered it, often succumbed not through persuasion, but through recognition. Something in the soul aligned, like a shard of broken glass falling into the shape of a mirror. This was not a faith you converted to. It was a truth you remembered. What makes their origin so dangerous is its lack of centralization. There is no high priest, no single relic, no fortress monastery to burn. The cult is a contagion of despair, masquerading as acceptance, carried in whispered prayers and forgotten names. It has passed through void crews, mining colonies, isolated regiments, even black ships. Some believe fragments of it have infected astropathic transmissions, encoded in psychic undertones, infecting minds at light speed. The Inquisition has since declared a zero-tolerance policy toward all symbols of the end echo. But exterminations only create more martyrs. Every scorched ship, every glassed planet, becomes another chapter in the cult's unholy scripture. They call these sites remembrance shrines, not because they remember what was lost, but because they teach that nothing was ever saved. Among the Adeptus Mechanicus, rumors now persist of a subcult called the Cognitari Thanatos, tech priests who have concluded through calculation alone that entropy has already won. Even among the Astartes, whispers exist of a single company of the exorcists. Chapter vanishing into the void, leaving behind only the words, "We were echoes, now we are the silence." The origin of this cult is not a story with a beginning. It is a revelation that blooms backwards, not a movement that grows, but a decay that remembers. It is the moment when a soul looks at the stars and no longer sees fire, only ashes. The moment you hear your own thoughts echo and realize there is no wall for them to bounce off, only the void, only the end. To journey through the void, the echoes of final light do not command fleets in the traditional sense. They do not conquer or chart courses with the confidence of novice nobles. Instead, they drift. Their ships, if they can be called that, are not vessels of war but sarcophagi, space hulks cobbled together from dead cruisers, mining rigs, and pilgrimage barges long abandoned. These are not maintained so much as preserved in ruin, their systems kept barely functional, their corridors thick with incense smoke and lined with cracked devotional icons smeared with black wax. The cult does not name their ships. Names imply identity, legacy, and memory, all things they reject. Instead, each craft is referred to by a dirge number, a sequence of syllables spoken only once before it is consigned to oblivion. Inside, the walls are covered with murals painted in ash, depicting scenes of a galaxy weeping, worlds crumbling into silence, stars imploding into nothingness, while humanoid silhouettes kneel in passive reverence. These are not warnings, but celebrations. Travel is not a means of reaching a destination. It is a rite. Every transition into the warp is performed with ceremony and lamentation, as if descending into a grave. Choirs of pale-robed mourners gather in the Geller fields, chanting dirges that make the air taste like dust. The warp engines are engaged not by command but by votive ritual, offerings of memory, of breath, of silence. Some say the cult's ships float through the immaterium in such profound stillness that even demons pass them by, unbothered, as if recognizing a fellow relic of the past. They travel from world to world not to convert, not to seek allies or resources, but to witness. Each arrival is marked by a ritual called the Unseeing, a slow descent onto the planet in total silence, void lights dimmed, vox emitters dead. When they land, if they land at all, they do so in the ruins, the burial grounds, the mass graves of past conflicts. There, they walk among the bones and burnt stone, not with sorrow, but with peace. They gather relics not to preserve, but to remember the illusion of preservation. Often they leave behind monoliths of obsidian engraved with simple phrases. You were, now you echo. Among the void-born of the Imperium, stories abound of encountering these drifter shrines in the black. A trade hauler veers close to a derelict that should be dead, only to receive a burst transmission of harmonic static that induces weeping among the crew. A patrol frigate investigates a beaconless vessel, boards it, and finds a cathedral within the engine core, built entirely from skulls fused with wire. A Mechanicus exploration fleet receives a data package on the edge of the Segmentum Obscurus, composed of nothing but star maps showing only dead systems. What unnerves most is that these cult vessels do not follow logical patterns of movement. Their drift is not random, but it is not comprehensible. They do not follow trade routes or warp lanes. They move as if pulled by memory, drawn toward places where the veil between life and its absence feels thinnest. Some say they are mapping a cosmic pattern of extinction. Others believe they are searching for the place where the final thought of the galaxy was spoken, not to find it, but to sit beside it in quiet. The cult's pilgrims do not fear the void. They venerate it. To them, the space between stars is not empty, but full of absence, a sacred saturation of what no longer is. Many of them refuse to wear void suits, trusting instead in the cold to embrace them when the time comes. In ritual offerings, they open hatches to the void and let chants spill into the silence, believing that the vacuum remembers. There are even tales, unverified but persistent, of cult vessels materializing within Imperial docking bays despite no records of warp translation, as if the ship had not traveled but emerged from behind the illusion of time. These apparitions are brief, their presence marked by flickering lights and a thickening of the air, as if grief itself had taken form. By the time dock security arrives, there is nothing left but a smear of black wax and a memory of music that no one can describe. To the cult, each journey through the stars is a funeral procession. Each destination is a tombstone, and each breath taken aboard their vessels is a defiance of truth, for they believe their lungs fill not with air, but with the last sighs of a dead cosmos. They do not steer their ships. They surrender to them. And in that surrender lies a serenity that no void-faring navigator or rogue trader can comprehend. For the cult believes they are not moving forward. They are simply following the path of the end, wherever it first remembered itself. Among the many figures that drift through the bleak liturgy of the echoes of final light, one name, if it can be called that, stands out like a tombstone amid ash, the saint of silence and memory. She is not worshipped. That would imply divinity, and divinity implies hope. She is remembered, which is a different kind of reverence entirely. She is the first mourner, the weeping bell, the prophet of the scream that ended the galaxy. In some circles, she is said to have no face, only a reflection. In others, she has 1,000 faces, each one belonging to someone who forgot her. Her origin is cloaked in contradictions. Some claim she was once an astropath who stared too deeply into the warp and saw the last day of all things etched across the immaterium like a scar. Others whisper she was a sister of silence who broke her vow not with a word, but with a lament so pure it silenced a demon prince into non-being. There are those who claim she was never human at all, merely the last coherent dream of the Emperor in the moment his consciousness collapsed into godhood. But in every telling, she emerges not as a savior, but as a mourner. Not to guide, but to grieve. She is said to carry with her the bell without sound, a relic that resonates not in the air, but in the minds of the dying. Those who have heard its toll say it is not a noise but a realization, a sudden and complete understanding that nothing continues. That all struggle has been a dance upon a grave. Those who survive its tolling, and few do, emerge blank-eyed, often joining the cult without resistance, as if something that held them upright has simply ceased. Depictions of the saint vary wildly, often shifting even within the same shrine. One mural may show her robed in funereal black, her eyes bleeding stars. Another shows her skinless, all nerves and exposed muscle, the agony of memory made flesh. Others present her as a blindfolded girl holding a mirror that reflects only the viewer's regrets. In every form, she is surrounded by symbols of forgetting. Burned books, shattered hourglasses, wilted roses made from bone. No two representations are identical, but all feel unmistakably the same, an overwhelming presence of absence. She features in the cult's darkest rites as the one who first unremembered. In their foundational myth, the galaxy had already died, but no one noticed. She did. Not because she was more perceptive, but because she had lost everything worth lying to herself about. Her memory was so voided by grief that truth, unfiltered, crept in. And in seeing the end clearly, she became its voice, or its silence. Her first sermon was a weeping fit that lasted an entire planetary rotation. Her followers did not transcribe her words. They collected the ash of her tears and mixed it into the ink of future scripture. Her rituals are echoed by the cult in their most sacred ceremonies. When a new shrine world is discovered, meaning a world they believe remembers its own extinction, the cult reenacts the saint's pilgrimage. They walk in silence for 111 hours, barefoot and hooded, carrying no weapons, only mirrors. At the end, they plant a bell into the ground and bury it under layers of ash. It is not rung. It is never rung. But those who sleep nearby report dreams filled with the sound of a toll they cannot forget. Legends persist that her final act, if indeed she had a final act, was to blind herself not out of piety, but out of mercy. For she had seen too much. She had seen the death not of worlds or empires, but of meaning itself. She saw the warp unravel, the stars go dark not physically, but symbolically. She saw the Emperor as he truly was, a being of brilliance, yes, but one so exhausted, so fractured, that his final breath was not a command, but an apology. The cult does not believe she died. Death, to them, is too crude a word. They say she dissolved, that she became the idea of memory unmade, that wherever someone remembers a loved one who never existed or mourns a future that will never come, she is there, not watching, not guiding, just present, a ghost of a ghost keeping vigil over a grave no one else can see. To those outside the cult, the saint of silence and memory is a myth, a psychological contagion, perhaps even a warp echo that feeds on grief. But to the echoes, she is the closest thing to peace they can imagine, a being who embraced the end not as defeat, but as the only form of honesty left. In her silence they find resonance. In her memory they forget themselves. And in her name they unname all things. To the echoes of final light, existence is not a linear thread, but a reverberation, a decaying echo of a note long since played. This belief forms the heart of their most blasphemous doctrine, the doctrine of echoexistence. In this worldview, time did not shatter at the end. It frayed. The galaxy did not collapse. It bled. And everything we perceive as life is merely a ghost signal flickering across the hollow plains of what once was, animated not by purpose, but by residual inertia. They claim the Horus heresy did not merely mark a turning point. It unspooled the last coherent strand of real causality. In that final cataclysmic act of father striking son, the weave of destiny was cut, and all timelines were reduced to echoes, reflections with no source. The Imperium, Chaos, the Xenos races, all are now phantoms of themselves, perpetually acting out memories of existence without the substance to sustain them. What we call the present is merely the trailing edge of a forgotten scream. Echoexistence teaches that perception is no longer a window, but a prison. What you see is not what is. It is what was, distorted and decayed. Memory is not a record, but a parasite, clinging to the soul to simulate continuity. Even the passage of time, they argue, is false. The ticking of clocks, the movement of stars, all of it is the brain, struggling to pretend that cause still leads to effect. In truth, the cult believes, nothing has truly happened since the end. Everything now is just a slow-motion unraveling of entropy disguised as motion. This doctrine is not metaphorical. It is lived. Cultists speak of the moment they achieved the dissonance, the internal realization that they had never truly been alive. They describe it not with terror, but relief, like waking from a dream and realizing you had never been born. After the dissonance, cultists report strange perceptions, voices speaking backwards, stars blinking in impossible patterns, memories of events that never occurred but feel more real than those that did. They believe this is not madness, but clarity, the illusion breaking down, like static giving way to the cold truth of silence. The idea of action, of choice, is ridiculed within the cult. They see free will as a cruel joke, the twitching of dead nerves long after the soul has fled the body. Orders are given not as commands, but as confirmations. "You were always going to do this," they intone, "and so you did." Their scripts are written not as instructions, but as memorials. Their chants do not plead for intervention or change. They simply repeat the moments that were, over and over, until those moments unravel like frayed cloth. Even death in this creed is not real. For how can something die if it never truly existed? They do not fear death because, to them, it already occurred, universally, simultaneously, irreversibly. What remains is inertia, the twitching of cosmic muscle, a flame still burning because it does not know the wick has ended. The body moves, the gun fires, the blade falls, but none of it is real. Not in the way it once was. Not since the scream. Not since the end. Their cathedrals are built as echoes of structures that never existed. Halls with asymmetrical dimensions, rooms designed to reflect sounds in reverse, altars built to crumble. These are not artistic statements, but acts of faith. They believe that by constructing spaces that fail to obey the logic of memory, they are making offerings to the truth. That logic no longer applies. Every misplaced column, every stairway that leads to void, is a rejection of coherence, a declaration that the old rules no longer bind them. Some within the Inquisition have theorized that this doctrine is a reaction to warp trauma, a psychological virus passed through broken psycher lines and decaying noospheric transmissions. But others fear it may be something worse, that the cult has, through some accident or revelation, seen a glimpse of the final truth buried beneath all matter, that they have heard the death rattle of the galaxy and are now singing along. Psychers who attempt to read the minds of cultists often recoil in horror, reporting not madness but emptiness. Not the buzzing chaos of insanity, but the soft static of nothing at all. Like tuning into a signal only to find that the station died millennia ago, and no one turned the transmission off. These psychers often go silent themselves, some joining the cult, others taking their own lives, leaving behind notes that speak not of torment, but of understanding. To most, echoexistence is madness wrapped in ritual, but to its adherents, it is the only sanity left. Everything else, the wars, the thrones, the prayers, is insanity, a delusion of life in a dead galaxy. To live, truly live, is to accept that it already ended, that we are not survivors. We are echoes, and every breath, every heartbeat, every act of love or war or faith is just a ripple in the quiet, a whisper in a silence that no longer needs us. If the echoes of final light have a true enemy, it is not the Inquisition or the Adeptus Astartes. It is not the Imperium, nor chaos, nor even death itself. It is hope. Hope to them is the greatest heresy, the final lie whispered into the ears of corpses to keep them dreaming. Where others may see it as a beacon in the dark, the cult sees only a cruel trick of the dying senses, a hallucination of meaning created by a mind that refuses to accept its own extinction. To the cultists, hope is not simply false, it is violence. It is the prolonging of suffering under the guise of salvation. Every act of heroism, every sacrifice made in the name of a better tomorrow is to them an act of denial, a desecration of the truth. They see those who cling to hope as addicts clinging to a poisoned drug, not fools, but victims. Victims who must be silenced before they infect others with the illusion of possibility. This hatred of hope defines much of the cult's outward activity. Unlike many heretical groups, the Echoes do not attempt to proselytize. They do not promise transcendence or rebirth. They seek only to unmake illusions. And nowhere is illusion more persistent, more insidious than in the hearts of the hopeful. When the cult encounters such souls, whether civilians awaiting a savior, soldiers rallying for a last stand, or missionaries preaching redemption, they move to extinguish them not with rage, but with solemn purpose. On battlefield after battlefield, the cult's agents have been observed entering conflict zones not to engage the enemy, but to locate the flickers of hope. Medicae tents are targeted first, not out of tactical advantage, but because they represent the belief that suffering can be reversed. Vox arrays are sabotaged to prevent messages of reassurance from reaching isolated squads. Chaplains and commissars are singled out for assassination, their skulls left adorned with mirrors to reflect the last thing they saw, the shattering of their faith. Their most horrific tactic, however, is known as the ritual of the shattered future. In areas where Imperial forces have begun to rally, where victories seem possible, the cult performs psychic mass lamentations, rituals that saturate the local noosphere with despair. Using psychers drained of all identity, they create ambient fields of psychic decay that disrupt the emotional coherence of their enemies. Veterans forget why they fight. Children cry without knowing why. Machines begin to rust in moments. In such zones, even the most stoic warriors falter, not from fear, but from the overwhelming sense that none of it matters. To the Echoes, the existence of hope is a cosmic insult. It is the lie that sustained the Imperium through 10,000 years of rot. It is the thread that connects the false narratives of victory, honor, and sacrifice. They despise the ecclesiarchy not for its power, but for its ability to weave hope into the bones of its sermons. They see the Imperial Creed not as tyranny, but as necromancy, the animation of a corpse empire through the delusion of destiny. In this war against hope, their most targeted adversaries are often not warriors, but storytellers. Astropaths who carry myths of glory across the stars. Imperial historians who revise defeats into victories. Prophets who speak of visions of renewal. These are the ones the cult stalks across space and time, seeking to silence not just their voices, but the very ideas they represent. Some say the cult possesses a lexicon of forbidden names, individuals whose lives must end not because of what they have done, but because of what they might inspire. It is not unusual for the Echoes to spare a planet if its populace has already fallen into despair. Worlds left in ruin, their cities abandoned, their skies choked with ash, often receive no further violence. To the cult, such places are already aligned with the truth. It is only where joy remains, where songs are still sung, that the cult returns, to still the notes, to silence the chorus. Among their own, even the whisper of hope is punishable by ritual forgetting. A cultist who speaks of what could be is made to lie in a coffin of mirrors, surrounded by recordings of failed uprisings, lost children, broken oaths. They are not punished out of malice, but out of mercy, as one might comfort a friend trapped in a dream too painful to continue. To the rest of the galaxy, this war against hope is incomprehensible. Even chaos, with all its cruelty, offers paths of transformation. But the Echoes offer nothing. No future, no reward, no liberation, only acknowledgement, only truth. And yet, they endure. Not because they promise anything, but because they confirm a terrible suspicion buried in every soul, that the light at the end of the tunnel is not salvation. It is the fading memory of a son that died before we were born. There is a ceremony within the echoes of final light that even their most stoic mourners perform with trembling reverence, the death mask rites. It is not a sacrament of death, for to them death is not an event, but a remembered truth. Rather, it is an aesthetic encapsulation of forgetting, the sacred art of erasing the illusion of identity. In a galaxy built on honor, legacy, and the myth of individuality, the cult crafts masks not to honor the dead, but to disprove the living. Each death mask begins with the same ritual, the invocation of the name unmaking. A whisper passed from mourner to mourner, this chant disassembles the syllables of the deceased's name until it no longer resembles speech. Only when the name is broken can the mask be made, for only then can the false ego be discarded. The masks are not decorative. They are crude, asymmetrical, often forged from bone, metal fragments, or ceramic wreckage. Their grotesqueness is not an accident, but an article of faith, a rejection of memory's tendency to beautify the dead. No two masks are identical, and yet they all seem to share the same haunted expression. A gaze that sees nothing, a mouth that remembers screams it never made. Cult artisans speak of being guided not by inspiration, but by resonance, as if the galaxy itself carves through their hands, shaping the void left behind by forgotten souls. Once completed, the mask is placed upon the mourner, who then undergoes a period of silence, typically 77 hours, during which they do not eat, drink, or sleep. They sit in a circle of ash, surrounded by candles made from black wax and melted memory coils. This silence is not penance, it is alignment. The wearer allows their own thoughts to dissolve, becoming not themselves, but an echo of the one they mourn. The goal is not to recall that person, for memory is false, but to unremember them so thoroughly that only the shape of their absence remains. The mask becomes not a tribute, but a vacuum, a placeholder for a presence that no longer belongs in the world. In larger cult gatherings, masks are worn in layers. Some mourners bear 5, 10, even 50 masks upon their robes, each representing a soul they have unremembered. These are the ash pilgrims, the spiritual elite of the echoes, who wander from shrine to shrine, gathering the forgotten like collectors of beautiful absences. They do not speak, they do not react. They only sit and watch, and sometimes weep, not for grief, but for the faint flickers of identity that remain like dust motes in the dark. The most sacred of all masks are those called the null faces. These are reserved for figures of immense symbolic weight, an imperial saint whose shrine was desecrated, a rogue trader whose dynasty was erased from every chart, a Primaris lieutenant whose name was wiped from all vox logs. These masks are never shown. They are stored in reliquaries sealed with psychic void glass and guarded by silent sentinels. The cult believes that to glimpse a null face is to risk re-remembering, and thereby reviving the lie of identity. The death mask rites extend beyond the cult. In worlds tainted by their presence, entire communities have adopted mask rituals, believing, wrongly, that they bring peace to the dead. Some Forge worlds have found corrupted STC blueprints for mask printers and unknowingly produce icons of negation that undermine morale. In rare cases, Imperial commanders have captured these masks and tried to study them, only for their scribes and lex mechanics to report hallucinations, language distortion, and in one case, a complete loss of the concept of the self. But for the cult, this is the point. Each mask is a weapon, not against flesh, but against identity, against the illusion that we are unique, continuous beings, against the hope that our thoughts are our own. To wear the mask is to remember that we are echoes, that we are impressions left in wet ash, that the face we claim is only the last expression we made before the end, frozen in place by the refusal to forget. In their greatest rites, the cult does not fight, does not chant, does not march. They assemble in silence, wearing thousands of masks, standing motionless upon the ruins of a city or within the corridors of a derelict vessel. They say nothing. They move not at all. They become a mirror of the void, not reflecting but absorbing. The silence stretches and the wind itself seems to avoid them. And in that moment, they believe, the universe comes closest to understanding itself, not as something living, but as something already ended, carried only in the faces that no longer remember who they were. Where most wars are fought to claim, to conquer, or to defend, the echoes of final light fight for none of these things. Their wars of unbelief are not campaigns of territorial gain, nor expressions of fanaticism. They are not even truly wars. They are funerals conducted at scale, exorcisms of delusion by the blade and by the word. When the echoes take to the battlefield, it is not to win. It is to deny, to unmake, to cleanse the lie that life persists with any meaning. Unlike the cult's smaller rituals and pilgrimages, these wars are coordinated and purposeful, albeit in a manner that defies conventional strategy. They do not strike key command centers, nor do they hold ground. Instead, they choose targets based on psychic resonance, locations where belief is strongest. A shrine world undergoing a revival, a forge world achieving an innovation, a hive spire unified by a popular saint. These places are not bastions to the cult. They are tumors of hope that must be excised before they metastasize. Their tactics are horrifyingly poetic. On the moon of Sanctus Bellum, during a planetary-wide Holy Week, cult forces infiltrated under cover of penitent robes. At the apex of the celebration, they broadcast a null chant across the city's Vox grid, a string of negative liturgies that induced psychic seizures in every astropath and choir member. As the faithful knelt in confusion, the cult emerged, not with guns blazing, but with funeral bells and death masks. They processed silently through the streets, scattering ash and dark wax, burning altars not for desecration, but for purification. No demands were made, no ultimatums given. And when the fighting began, it was cold and methodical, every target selected for the hope they embodied. The Inquisition classifies these attacks as morale disruptions on a par with demon outbreaks. What makes them distinct and deeply feared is their effect on survivors. It is not uncommon for entire regiments to surrender without a shot, not from cowardice, but from emotional collapse. Officers report troops becoming catatonic, muttering paradoxes about echoes and non-being, sometimes joining the cult mid-conflict, laying down arms and donning masks fashioned from flakboard and blood. There is no mercy in these wars, but there is no cruelty either. The echoes do not gloat, they do not torture, they do not boast. They silence, and in that silence lies the true terror. Where chaos leaves corruption and mutation, the echoes leave emptiness, cities abandoned not by evacuation, but by forgetting. Data slates with names scrubbed, memorials with no figures, cogitators with erased logs, as if the people never lived, the battles never happened, and the world simply quieted into absence. In rare cases, they are confronted by true martial resistance. Space Marines have faced them and emerged victorious. But even these victories are haunted. The Salamanders speak of a battle on Naur 7, where, after routing the cult's forces, they discovered that every servo skull in the region had been reprogrammed to whisper, "You remember what never was." The Ultramarines reclaimed the city of Oryx Prime, only to find that every cathedral had been rebuilt, not destroyed, in precise architectural mockeries of places that never existed, each one mapped to dream structures reported in ancient psyker visions. Some say the cult does not even intend to win, that their battles are performances, rituals of unfaith carried out through violence. Each death is not a loss or a gain, but a verse in a great funereal canticle, one designed to unwrite the very idea of struggle. They record nothing. They celebrate nothing. Their victories are marked only by moments of stillness, by the sound of the wind over ruined chapels, by the silence of cities that no longer know their names. On the world of Desolatia, Imperial Guard regiments found themselves facing an army composed entirely of former PDF, now reclad in ash gray and bound in silence. The cult made no use of artillery or vehicles. They walked across minefields, accepted casualties without recoil, and when they reached the trenches, they knelt. Just knelt, staring. It was enough. The regiments broke, not because of force, but because of doubt, the creeping realization that the enemy was not trying to kill them, but to help them see. These wars are spreading, across Segmentum Pacificus and Solar, across the fringe colonies of the Halo stars. Whispers of end priests and the echoed now reach even secure astropathic channels. The Inquisition has begun assigning entire task forces to trailing these movements, but with little success. For every cult battle witnessed, 3 more are suspected to have occurred and vanished, erased from memory or rewritten by the void. The echoes of final light do not march to conquer. They process to mourn. Their wars are not rebellions. They are elegies. And the more they are fought, the more it seems the galaxy itself listens and begins ever so subtly to fall quiet. It would be a mistake to assume that the echoes of final light are alone in their philosophy. The 41st millennium is a graveyard of ideologies and fractured beliefs, and in the shadow of the Imperium's slow collapse, strange alliances fester. The cult has found kin not in shared values or mutual goals, but in shared acknowledgement, the silent recognition among the damned that the galaxy is no longer alive. In the bleak quiet between battles, they have begun to converge with others who also walk the path of ending. Some chaos war bands, particularly those detached from the eye-burning orgies of excess or rage, find in the echoes a chilling mirror. The slaughtered hosts, a Nurgle-affiliated sect, have been witnessed fighting alongside the cult, not in glory but in stillness. Their plague marines do not chant, do not celebrate, do not mock. They simply rot and walk and kill, side by side with ash-robed mourners who lay down wax seals on corpses mid-conflict. The unspoken pact seems to be this: death has already come, and they are merely here to tidy the remnants. Renegade psychers, particularly those rejected by both Imperium and Chaos for their fractured minds, are also drawn to the cult's gravity. These psychers often speak of hearing the same tone, a frequency of sorrow that resonates across the warp, like a funeral bell for reality itself. Within the cult, they find not structure, but stillness. No dogma, only the acceptance that their visions were not madness, but echoes of the truth. Some among them become what the cult calls silent oracles, their mouths sewn shut, their thoughts allowed to bleed only into wax tablets scrawled in reversed scripture. Perhaps the strangest alliance is with certain Necron dynasties, or rather fragments of them. The Necron themselves would scoff at the spiritual trappings of the cult, but even they recognize a kinship in decay. The Nihilak dynasty, obsessed with eternal order, has reportedly made pacts of non-aggression with cult flotillas passing through their territory. What could possibly unite a race of soulless machines and flesh-and-blood heretics? The answer is simple. Both believe the galaxy has no future. Both exist not to live, but to persist. It is even rumored that one cryptech, known only as the Lament Circuit, has created a construct that mirrors the cult's death mask rites, an algorithm that renders the psychological profile of extinct species in synthetic faces. These data masks are not worn, but projected in the Tomb World's cathedrals of silence, watched by scarab swarms in total stillness. The cult, upon discovering this, reportedly declared it a holy site, despite its Xenos origin. They left offerings: ash, black wax, and the name of a species no longer remembered. Among humans, it is not unusual for splinters of other heretical cults to drift toward the echoes. Doomsayers from the Imperial fringe, failed prophets of the God Emperor's return, even broken ecclesiarchy clergy who have stared too long into the void. These are not recruited. They arrive, drawn by dreams, by songs, by the quiet. The cult does not embrace them immediately. They must first undergo the rite of the Ash Drift, a solitary pilgrimage through dead systems during which they are forbidden from speaking, thinking, or remembering. Those who survive this journey without clinging to who they were are allowed to don the ash robe. Those who do not return are not mourned. They are considered fulfilled, dissolved into the truth they sought. Some of the Inquisition's most terrifying records describe an incident on the World of Sin's Hollow, where a splinter group of word-bearers clashed not with Imperial forces, but with the Echoes themselves. The traitor Marines had begun preaching a warped gospel of rebirth, declaring that the Long War would birth a new pantheon. The Echoes viewed this as blasphemy of the highest order. The battle lasted 40 hours. In the end, the cult did not kill the Chaos Marines. They erased them. Vox recordings show final images of Astartes breaking down weeping, scratching at their armor, screaming, "We never were," before turning their bolters inward. These alliances are not formal, not negotiated. They are gravitational. The echoes of final light are a black hole of belief, and those near enough to feel their pull cannot help but orbit. Some spiral closer, some crash inward. All are changed, and in this constellation of the lost, a new shape is forming. Not an army, not a rebellion, but a tone, a frequency, a resonance of finality that stretches across species and ideologies, a harmony of the hopeless, all singing different dirges in the same key of despair. The Echoes do not command this choir. They do not need to. The song sings itself. All they do is listen and wait for the last note. The warp has been called many things: the Sea of Souls, the Immaterium, the Realm of Chaos. To the Imperium, it is a necessity wrapped in danger. To the servants of Chaos, it is a playground of divinity and damnation. But to the Echoes of Final Light, it is none of these. To them, the warp is a coffin, not a place of energy, but a sarcophagus of dying thought, a tomb for a reality that already passed into oblivion and refuses to be still. Their doctrine holds that the warp is not an alternate dimension, but the decay field of the material universe's last scream. It is the spiritual afterbirth of a dead galaxy, where emotion and memory ferment into rotting forms. Demons are not gods or entities, but maggots feeding on the corpse of belief. Warp storms are not tides of chaos, but pockets of decomposition, psychic gangrene spreading from the wounds inflicted upon existence during the end. This interpretation informs every act the cult performs in relation to the Immaterium. They do not navigate the warp, they surrender to it. Their vessels drift with minimal Geller field integrity, not because they are reckless, but because they believe that resisting the warp is to resist truth. Survivors of cult shipboardings often describe an eerie stillness aboard, even as the warp boils outside, as if the ship and the void had reached an agreement, a pact of mutual silence. Their psychers, rare and terrifying, are not trained. They are awakened, chosen not for their power, but for their resonance with the end. They do not channel the warp in the traditional sense. They exhale it. They are treated not as conduits of energy, but as tombstones, psychic relics around whom reality warps in quiet, irreversible ways. They are not given names, only numbers, and their words are recorded in reversed liturgies that are never spoken aloud. The cult's rituals within the warp are chilling in their simplicity. They do not call upon gods. They do not seek protection. They sit in circles, heads bowed, listening to the quiet. Occasionally, one will begin to speak, not in tongues, but in perfectly calm tones, describing places that do not exist, memories that no one can verify, moments that feel real but have no reference. These are called the coffin visions, revelations of a universe that died screaming and left its bones in the dark. Imperial astropaths who intercept their transmissions often suffer irreversible psychological trauma. The signals are not encrypted, nor are they chaotic. They are still. So still that they create psychic echoes in the minds of the receivers, leading to symptoms like silence-induced seizures, emotional decay, and memory detachment. Some astropaths are found repeating the same sentence for days. It ended. We forgot, but it ended. In some blasphemous texts confiscated by the Ordo Malleus, there are references to a so-called wound of thought, a theoretical rift in the warp where all unacknowledged grief collects. The echoes of final light believe they originated from this rift, not geographically, but spiritually. They claim it is not a place one can travel to, but a realization one can inhabit, that within each soul lies a corner of this wound, and that by opening it, one can hear the scream of the galaxy's last breath. Demonic encounters with the cult are anomalous. Many demons seem repelled by them, not out of fear, but confusion. Some fade in their presence as if embarrassed to exist. Others lash out violently, only to vanish mid-assault, as though overwritten by the very idea of irrelevance. The cult believes this is proof that demons themselves know they are not real, not anymore, and that their continued existence is a mockery of truth. The cult has no interest in controlling the warp, nor in understanding its mechanics. They see the study of the immaterium as a fool's errand, like studying the pattern of decay in a corpse to resurrect the soul. The warp, in their eyes, is not a frontier. It is the morgue. Every warp translation is not a journey, but a descent. Every psychic power is not a miracle, but a death rattle. Perhaps most chilling is their belief that the warp is beginning to remember. Not in the sense of intelligence, but in the sense that a grave remembers the weight of the body it once held. They speak of whispers not as voices, but as sighs. Of lights in the warp not as stars, but as reflections of stars long dead. And they believe that, one day, even the warp will quiet, that its roil and storm will settle into perfect stillness. And on that day, the galaxy will not end. It will finally acknowledge that it already has. On Holy Terra, where the veil between godhood and decay is thinnest, the echoes of final light whisper through the cracks. To speak of cults on the throne world is to court inquisitorial wrath, yet even the Adeptus Arbites cannot deny that something stirs beneath the spires and cathedrals, not openly, never in force, but like a bruise under the skin of faith. The cult's infection is psychic, linguistic, mimetic. It hides in silence, in what is not said, in what is forgotten. It begins often with astropaths. The pressure on Terra's psychers is immense, burdened not only with the demands of constant translation, but with the psychic weight of the Astronomicon itself. For some, this strain breaks the mind. For others, it opens something deeper. A few have begun reporting dreams in which the Emperor does not speak, but weep. Not visions of wrath or fire, but of vast silence. Of a throne empty not in form, but in meaning. These psychers do not scream upon awakening. They cry, and they write compulsively in mirrored glyphs that speak of endings already past. Among the Adeptus Mechanicus on Mars, fragments of the cult's data patterns have emerged in low-tier code prayers. Hidden in subroutines and maintenance chants, tech adepts have found phrases like, no thought, no echo, only memory. These are not viral corruptions. They are elegant, recursive, coded in such a way that to delete them is to risk deleting the entire machine spirit they infect. Some believe they are implants seeded by the cult's silent oracles, smuggled into cogitator banks by data-haunted servitors. The Schola Progenium has also reported anomalies. A series of pupils across several hives have independently created art projects depicting cities in ruin, crowned by black suns and weeping statues. When questioned, the children report no memory of making them. In one case, a child who sculpted a face in bone ash, identical to a known death mask of the cult, could not speak afterward, only hum a low, dirge-like tone no one could identify. Her music box, confiscated for analysis, played the same sequence in reverse, despite its mechanism being entirely analog. Within the ecclesiarchy itself, a few preachers have fallen into silent trances mid-sermon, staring at the aquila and whispering, "It does not fly. It only remembers flying." These incidents are rare and immediately covered up. The Ordo Hereticus has labeled them scripture distortions, blaming latent heretical exposure. Yet the frequency has increased, and among the lower clergy, rumors circulate of a hidden gospel, the unbook, said to be bound in blank pages that whisper truths only when the reader forgets their own name. Pilgrims have brought back strange relics from their journeys, not relics forged by imperial hands, but obelisks of ash glass engraved with symbols that shimmer only in shadow. Some swear they heard them hum. Some saw reflections of themselves that aged before their eyes. The ecclesiarchy burns these items, of course, but not before scribes transcribe them, and not before certain scribes disappear. Even the custodes, those golden paragons of will, have taken notice. In one secure archive beneath the palace, a black file known only as Thich-Orn 000 Echo catalogues every recorded incident related to the cult on Terra. It is sealed with 3 layers of psychic wards and accessed only under triple authorization. The last entry is blank, not corrupted. Blank. An absence that registers as data. That emptiness is what terrifies those few who know it exists. It is in Terra's silence that the echoes thrive, not in rebellion, not in fire, but in the lull between prayers, in the breath between words. The cult understands that to break Terra is not to conquer it. It is to let it realize what it has already lost. That the Emperor's light is not a beacon, but a reflection. That the throne is not a seat of power, but a tombstone no one dares name as such. And so they whisper, in the dust between sermons, in the malfunction of data slates, in the dreams of children, in the silence between the beats of the Astronomicon. The end is not coming to Terra. It is already there, hiding in plain sight, waiting for the final prayer to fade, and for the faithful to finally listen to what the silence is trying to say. This is the last sermon. There are no trumpets, no fire, no screams, no prophecy, only the soft echo of footsteps in a cathedral of dust, and the silence that follows them. This is what the echoes of final light offer in the end. Not revelation, not liberation, only the final unmasking of a lie so old it became the air we breathe. They do not speak of salvation because there is nothing to save. They do not speak of damnation because we are already there. They speak only of the truth that hovers behind every creed and commandment, behind every imperial oath and chaos incantation, that it already ended. That the galaxy is a dying dream, and we are its reflexes, twitching in a void that no longer echoes us back. This is not despair, it is freedom. To the cult, this knowledge is not a weapon. It is a release. It does not incite rebellion. It extinguishes it. It does not summon anger. It silences it. It is not a call to arms, but a lullaby to the soul. A lullaby sung not in words, but in the hush that follows the collapse of meaning. A song you remember hearing once, before you were born, in a place that never was. The echoes of final light do not ask for converts. They do not demand belief. They only wait. Wait for the day when each person, in their own time, stops pretending, stops shouting into the dark and listens. Really listens. And hears the truth that has always been there. The light at the end of the tunnel is not the way out. It is the memory of the fire that burned it all away. And so they walk, ash on their feet, wax on their hands, masks on their faces not to hide, but to dissolve. They walk not to spread a gospel, but to bear witness, to mark the places where the lie is strongest and help it crumble, to leave behind not monuments but absences, not teachings but unteachings. Their last sermon is not a scripture. It is a silence. It is the stillness left behind after the last bullet is fired, the last prayer spoken, the last defiant cry of a species that thought it mattered. It is a soft bell that rings in the heart and says, "You can stop now. You can lay it all down. The war is over. The story has ended. You were never alone, only dreaming in the grave." Some will resist this message. Many already have. And to them, the cult offers no condemnation, only understanding. It is hard to forget yourself, hard to let go, but eventually, they believe, everyone will remember what they have forgotten, that the galaxy already died, and that we are just the echo. And so they speak once and only once. Be still, be silent, be ended, and then nothing. That is the last sermon. If you've made it this far, listener, then perhaps something has stirred in you. Not fear, not outrage, but resonance. And if it has, subscribe to this channel. Let your thoughts echo where others may hear. Because in this universe of forgotten truths and endless wars, maybe the first step to peace is remembering what we lost and why we can never get it back.